Okay, this first video is going to be from Mrs. Nolan's 5th grade, and we have been reading together Louisiana's Way Home after completing the first of this series, which was Raymie Nightingale. So we have about 2 days worth of reading left in this book. I'm going to start today and read part, and then hopefully either the end of this week or the beginning of next, we will finish the book. So here we go. When we left off, Louisiana had been singing. Well, Granny had left Louisiana in Georgia, and she had been told she had to sing at a funeral, so she had gone to do that, but she ended up fainting and passing out in Reverend Obertast's office, and I believe now he is talking to her in his office after she's come to. I did not understand how someone who could play the organ so poorly, just as I did not understand how someone could have seemingly a lifetime supply of caramels and not share them. And here she's talking about Miss Lulu, the organist, is at the church, and she's still playing even though Louisiana is in Reverend Obertast's office recuperating from fainting. There was so much I did not understand. The sun came out from behind a cloud, and then it went back again. Light, dark, light, dark. I felt very sad. I said, I thought you would be able to help me. I thought you would have some kind of magic. On your door it says that you have dispensed healing words. I can listen to you, Louisiana Elefante, said Reverend Obertast. That is the only magic I have. Do you want to tell me the rest of your story? Reverend Obertast leaned back in his chair, and it let out another creak. The dust motes danced around cheerfully, and Miss Lulu continued to abuse Mr. Bach. I have a question for you, I said. I will do my best to answer it, said Reverend Obertast. Do you know the story of Pinocchio, I asked. I sure do. Well, then, you will know that Pinocchio gets separated from his father at the beginning of the book, and he spends the whole entire story separated from him until they meet up again in the belly of a whale. Yes, said Reverend Obertast. Will I spend my whole entire story of my life separated from the people I love? Reverend Obertast blinked. He said, I don't know, Louisiana. I can't see into the future. I do think that more often than not, love has a way of finding us. I looked into Reverend Obertast's sad, walrus face. It was the second time that I had stood in Reverend Obertast's office and come to the realization that I was all on my own. It's a good and healing thing to tell your story, said Reverend Obertast. So if you don't want to finish telling it to me, maybe you can find someone you trust to tell it to. Either way, I hope you will come and visit me again. Poor, ineffective Reverend Obertast. Perhaps I will visit you again, I said, just to cheer him up, and he smiled at me. And I smiled back at him but I did not use all of my teeth because, oh, my heart was heavy. Chapter 21. Burke and I were in the woods. We were sitting together under a tree, and Clarence was somewhere where I could not see him, but I knew he was there because he did not ever go far away from Burke, and it was nice. That was comforting. The sun was still shining, and the world was still spinning, and Reverend Obertast had not removed the curse from my head, but I felt different somehow. I looked at Burke and I said, I'm going to tell you what it was that in that terrible letter, and the first thing you need to know is that the flying Elefantes do not exist. The flying Elefantes do not exist. I hated that sentence. I hated it, but I had to say it. What do you mean they don't exist, said Burke. I mean, there were never any flying Elefantes. I don't even know who my parents were. And then I went ahead and I told him everything, all of it. I told him about young Granny and how her father had looked at her and when they then turned and walked away from her and how that was when the curse truly began. I told Burke about how Granny found me in the alley and picked me up. I told him that she was only someone who had found me and that I was not related to her at all. I told him that whoever Granny was, she was gone now and that she had left me and that I was alone in the world. Dang, said Burke when I was done. Well, I guess the good news is that if she ain't no relation of yours, then that curse ain't your curse. What? I said. It ain't your curse. It ain't on your head after all. I am not cursed, I said. I reckon not, said Burke. Not the way I figure it. I lay down in the grass. The world was suddenly spinning faster and faster. Who was I without the flying Elefantes? Who was I without Granny? And who was I without the curse upon my head? I felt as light as air. I felt as insubstantial as the ghost of a cricket. Maybe I don't exist at all, I said to Burke. Well, you surely do exist, said Burke. I know it for a fact. He looked over at me, and then he stood up and he whistled, and Clarence came flying to him and landed on his shoulder. Stand up, Louisiana, said Burke. No, I said. You gotta stand up. No, I said. The winds of fate had deposited me in the alley of a five and dime, and then the winds of fate had picked me up and put me in the woods in Georgia, and that was where I was staying. I was never going to move again. I was worse off even than Pinocchio, a wooden puppet who at least had a father who loved him and kept searching for him, not to mention a blue fairy who showed up from time to time. I lay on the ground, and Burke stood over me, and Clarence opened and closed his wings again and again. The sun came beating down through the trees and landed on Burke's arm and lit up Clarence's feathers. The world was beautiful. It surprised me how beautiful it kept on insisting on being in spite of all the lies. It was beautiful. In her letter, Granny had said that I smiled at her in the alley of the five and dime. Was that true? Louisiana, said Burke. What? I said. Don't you want to go find your granny? No, I said. I don't think so. I don't know what I want. I don't know who I am. Okay, said Burke. All right. We'll figure this out. Didn't you say you had a dog and a cat and some friends in Florida? Buddy, Archie, Ramey, and Beverly. Yes, I said. Didn't you say Florida was where you belonged? Yes, I said. Well, all right then, said Burke. You need to go home. Burke was right. I needed to go home. I stood up and I said, what direction is Florida again? And Burke rolled his eyes. He said, I'll help you, all right? I'll go with you, me and Clarence both. We need us a map and a bus schedule, and we'll go to Florida. First, we went to the Goodnight Sleep Tight to collect my belongings, but the door to room 102 was locked, and when we went into the motel office, Bernice told Burke to get out. You thief, she said. You leave here immediately. I'll wait for you outside, Louisiana, said Burke. Bernice's hair was still in those curlers. My goodness, I was tired of seeing those curlers. I was tired of seeing Bernice, too. What do you want? She asked me. I'm here to collect my belongings, I said. No, said Bernice. Your grandmother has absconded, and I do not want to hear whatever hard luck story you might have about that. I don't want to hear any of it. You will get your suitcase when the bill is paid, and the bill will only be paid when you have sung at a funeral. I stared at Bernice's head, and I concentrated on one curler in particular, and I stared at it just as hard as I could. I stared death rays into that curler. I am not afraid of you, I said. Good, said Bernice. I'm not afraid of you either. I'm tired of people taking advantage of my good nature. I wondered what good nature she was talking about. The funeral is at noon tomorrow, she said. Everything I owned was in that suitcase, and I did not have the energy for a battle of wills. Fine, I said. I will sing at that funeral. You bet you will, said Bernice. You be here at 11:30 tomorrow morning. Okay, I said, and maybe just as an extra special surprise for me, you will actually remove those curlers from your hair. I walked out of that office, and Burke was waiting for me. He had got me peanuts from the machine. I can't leave yet, I said. I have to sing at a funeral tomorrow, or else I can't get my suitcase back. And I can't leave my suitcase behind because I have already left so many other things behind. Well, that works out fine, said Burke. It'll give us time to plan out the whole thing. You can stay at my house tonight and tomorrow night. We can leave early on Saturday morning. I said, yes, that is exactly what we will do. We will leave. I felt a sudden my goodness, I was tired of leaving places. For someone who did not actually have a curse of sundering upon her head, it seemed to me that I was involved in quite a bit of sundering. Chapter 22. When we got back to the pink house in the woods, it smelled sweet again, because Betty Allen was baking another one of her 17 cakes. This one was a pineapple upside-down cake. I have never in my life had a pineapple upside-down cake, I said to Betty Allen. Well, we will have to rectify that, I'm sure, said Betty Allen. In the meantime, I would like it if Burke Allen explained to me why he wasn't in school today. I was helping Louisiana, said Burke. You can't keep skipping school, Burke, said Betty Allen. After a time, it will catch up with you, and you will find that life has closed its doors to you. You don't want life to close its doors to you, do you? No, ma'am, said Burke. He looked down at his feet. Open doors, said Betty Allen. That is what we want. Doors that are open to us. She put her hand on Burke's head, and she left it there a minute, and then she turned to me. Sweetie, is that the same dress you had on yesterday? It is, I said. My other dresses are in my luggage, and my luggage is currently unavailable to me. Why is your luggage currently unavailable to you? Many terrible and complicated things have happened, I said. Well, what are they? I stood in that sweet-smelling house, and I looked into Betty Allen's gentle face, and she looked back at me. I wanted to tell her that I didn't even know who I was. I wanted to tell her that I had been left. I wanted to tell her that she reminded me of the Blue Fairy. What I said was, have you ever read the story of Pinocchio? Burke gave me a shrug. He said, Louisie's granny ain't feeling good. Can Louisiana stay here with us? "What's wrong with your granny?" said Betty Allen. "Well, she's having tooth problems," I said, "and she needs some time to recuperate. She is extremely unwell. She is also a liar." Burke gave me another little shove, and he said, "Can Louisiana stay or not?" "Well, for heaven's sake, Burke," said Betty Allen, "of course Louisiana can stay." She kept her eyes on me, and she gave me a very serious look, and then she smiled the most beautiful smile, and she reached out her hand, and she placed it on top of my head, just the same as she had done with Burke, and it felt nice. "Thank you, Mama," said Burke. "Thank you, Mrs. Allen," I said. "Why don't the two of you go and wash up," said Mrs. Betty Allen. "Supper's going to be ready soon." At the dinner table that night, I sat next to Grandfather Burke. He said, "Look-a-here, there she is, sitting right at the table as pretty as you please. You need a phone book to sit on so as you can reach the table." "Don't pick on her, Grandpap," said Burke. "Pick on her? Well, I ain't picking on her. I'm glad to see her is all." He winked at me. "Daddy," said Burke's father, "you let her alone now. Let her eat." The dinner was fried chicken and green beans and mashed potatoes, and I ate everything set before me, and it was all very good, but truly, I wasn't even certain that I was there. I kept imagining that dark alley of the Louisiana 5 and dime. I kept hearing Burke say, "The curse ain't your curse," and I kept seeing Betty Allen smile at me. There was vanilla ice cream with chocolate sauce for dessert. We each had our own little cut glass bowl, and there were peanuts sprinkled on top of the chocolate sauce. I ate all of my ice cream. I scraped the bowl with my spoon, and then Grandfather Burke slid his bowl of ice cream over so that it was sitting right in front of me. I looked down at Grandfather Burke's bowl. The glass was twinkling in the light. It looked very pretty. It was dark outside, and there were lights on inside, and the bowl was catching all the light and everybody around the table, and the bowl was full of ice cream and chocolate sauce and peanuts, and I felt like I was right on the verge of understanding something. And then Grandfather Burke said, "That's for you, Doodlebug." And I stared down at that beautiful bowl, and I started to cry. "Why are you crying?" he said. I shook my head. "Leave her alone, Grandpap," said Burke. "I ain't done nothing to her except give her my dessert." I was crying too hard to pick up my spoon, and that is something that has never happened to me before. "What ails her?" said the grandfather. "She misses her granny," said Burke. "I do not miss my granny," I said. Grandfather Burke took hold of my hand, and in a very gentle voice he said, "Go on and eat it, darling. Take what is offered to you." And I was holding on to his horse hoof of a hand, and it gave me some courage and comfort, and after a while I stopped crying, and I picked up my spoon. "There you go, honey," said Betty Allen, and I ate that whole bowl of ice cream without once letting go of Grandfather Burke's hand. "That's the way to do it," he said. "That's just right." The peanuts on top of that sundae were particularly good. The house smelled like a pineapple upside-down cake. Well, the whole world was upside down. But it was still spinning, though, wasn't it? Chapter 23. In the morning, Burke went to the school. He said he would find the atlas and tear out a map of Florida and locate Lister and figure out exactly how we could get there. And Betty Allen washed my dress for me, which was very nice and thoughtful of her. At 11:30 sharp, I walked into the Goodnight Sleep Tight, and I turned myself over to Bernice, who did not have her hair in curlers. You can imagine my surprise. I almost didn't recognize her. She was wearing a shiny black dress, and her hair wasn't very curly when you consider how much time it had spent in those curlers. Mostly, Bernice just looked annoyed. Well, I was annoyed too. I wanted my suitcase back. I wanted to go home, even though I felt somewhat sad about sundering myself from Betty Allen and Burke Allen, and also from the grandfather Burke Allen, who was very good about sharing his food with me. We drove to the Lonely Shepherd Church in Bernice's green Buick Skylark. Bernice did not speak to me, and I did not speak to her. Bernice and I were never going to be friends, and that was just fine with me. Actually, I hoped that I never had to see her again in my life. I hoped I never had to see that Miss Lulu again either. "You're going to sing nice," Miss Lulu said to me when we arrived at the church, and she held up 2 fingers. "You're going to sing 2 times, at the beginning of the funeral and again at the end. You're going to sing the same song both times." The song was Amazing Grace, and it was a song I have sung 100,000 times before, because it is what people always want sung at funerals, and I have sung at 100,000 funerals because it was a good way for Granny to make some money. "Here are the words," said Miss Lulu. "If you would like to review them." She handed me a piece of sheet music. I did not take it from her. "I know the words," I said. She sighed, and the sigh smelled like caramel. You would think that eating all that candy would rot her teeth. I hoped it did. "I wonder if this child takes her responsibilities here seriously," Miss Lulu said to Bernice. "I assure you she does," said Bernice, and she gave me a deadly look. "Well, let me tell you something," said Miss Lulu. "I discovered her sneaking around Reverend Obertast's office yesterday with his pipe in her hand. Can you imagine?" She's capable of anything, said Bernice. Her grandmother has disappeared. You know, vanished, and she left the child here on her own. As far as I can tell, she's staying with the Allens, and you are well aware that Burke Allen is nothing but a truant and a vandal, and he will certainly do nothing to further this child's moral education. The two of them went on talking like I wasn't even standing there. Miss Lulu's curls bounced with every word she said. Bernice's fake curls, however, did not move at all. The church was filling up with people, and Reverend Obertask appeared, and he said to me, Louisiana Elefante, it is a delight to gaze upon your winsome face once again. Miss Lulu snorted. Reverend Obertask put a comforting hand on my shoulder. He said, let's get this show on the road, shall we? We will begin with the child singing, said Miss Lulu. Just as it should be, said Reverend Obertask. Just exactly as it should be. The light came through the stained glass windows. Bernice went and sat down, and Miss Lulu started to play the organ, and I stood up there and sang. Miss Lulu's playing was terrible, of course, but it was just not possible for me to sing without putting my whole heart into it. You have a gift, Louisiana, and the more of yourself you put into the song, the more powerful and truthful the song becomes. That is what Granny said to me. And if that woman knew anything, as if that woman knew anything about the truth. What a liar she was. She was nothing but a liar. Maybe I wasn't found in an alley at all. Who could say? And speaking of alleys, what kind of people put their baby on top of a pile of cardboard boxes in a dark alley? It was terrible, just as Reverend Obertask had said. My parents were terrible. No real mother would ever leave her baby in an alley. Why, Betty Allen would never do such a thing to Burke Allen in a million trillion years. Oh, and it made me mad to think about it, all of it. But even though I was mad, I put myself into that song. I put every bit of myself into it. There was a rustling out in the pews. It was the sound of people pulling tissues out of their pockets and their purses. They were all crying, and that was good. I wanted them to cry. I put even more of myself into the song. And then I saw something truly terrible. Sitting right there in the very front row was Mrs. Ivy from the dentist's office. Her lips were pulled into a straight line, and she was pulling a piece of paper out of her purse. Oh my goodness, it was the bill for the teeth removal, and she was waving it in the air. And then I noticed that Dr. Fox was sitting right next to Mrs. Ivy. His round glasses were winking in the light, and he was wearing the dental coat, and there was still a spot of blood on it. It seemed like a very inappropriate thing to wear to a funeral. The room tilted sideways, and then it righted itself again, and my goodness, the church building was like a ship on stormy waters. But I kept singing. And then I saw her. I saw Granny. I couldn't believe it. She was sitting right behind Dr. Fox, and she was wearing her fur coat, and she was smiling at me, using all of her teeth. Was she back already from fighting the curse? How did she manage to recover all her teeth? And was there no end to her powers? Way at the back of the church, somebody went floating by on a flying trapeze kind of outfit, which is also not the kind of thing you should wear to a funeral, but maybe the spangly outfit was just something I imagined, because it was there, a flash of light, and then it was gone. And when I looked away from the glittery light and back at Granny, she was still smiling at me. She was sitting up very tall, reminding me to stand up straight and to project my heart into the world. I shook my head. The sanctuary was tilting terribly again. Everything was sliding to one side, and I stopped singing. And then Miss Lulu stopped playing the organ, which was a relief. Everything was silent as could be. And that is when Clarence flew into the Good Shepherd, his dark feathers shining like a light. Clarence had come looking for me. It was so quiet in that church that you could hear the flapping of his wings. It sounded like the beating of a heart. Granny smiled at me. She said, provisions have been made, Louisiana. At least I think that's what she said. All I know for certain is that the church tipped again, and this time I tipped with it. So we will continue later. Basically, what's just happened is that Louisiana fainted in the middle of singing for this funeral, and she saw a lot of things that probably really weren't there, but we'll find out.